Hello, this is a tutorial on view representations. So if you have an assembly that is too big to really get all the information on one page, you can break it down within the assembly file. So if you go to your top left, as I work my way down the assembly tree or feature tree, I get to the representations folder, and if I open that up, I have three representations. I have a view, position, and level of detail. Now, unfortunately, this is a weldment, and the way I can tell, a couple ways I can see welds and machining. Those two only show up in weldments, and if I right click on position, new is grayed out. So position representations aren't available in weldments. Now the other two, view and level of detail. The view, basically you're turning on and off visibility, whereas with level of detail you're actually suppressing components, and it's to reduce the file size. I think there are other purposes, but like for instance, if you had a cabinet that was full of all kinds of components, maybe even moving components, but you can't see them, well, you could create a level of detail and suppress them all, everything that's inside of that cabinet, and leave just the cabinet, so that when you're putting the cabinet in the next assembly level, it's a reduced file size. But I'm going to focus on the view representation. So I'm going to expand view representation, and there's two. There's master and there's default. Master will have everything. If you have any planes or anything, if I double click on this, all those planes and everything will show up. Default is just basically it's recording everything you do. So for instance, if you create a plane and then you uncheck the visibility, it remembers that in the default view representation. So if you ever do put an assembly into another assembly, and all of a sudden all of your planes are showing up, it might be because it's showing your master view representation, and you need to switch it back to default, and that will turn the planes back off. So in this case, I want to right click on the top. If I collapse this again, that's kind of the top. It says it's telling you that the current view is default. Well, if you right click on that, you can click on new, and it'll give you a new view. So I'll rename this. Let's just say I want to, you can name them by steps, you can name them section 1 or whatever, according to whatever it is that you're doing. Okay, now a couple ways I can do this. I can go into the model view here, and I can right click on something, and and uncheck the visibility like I did with that motor. Or I can go through my parts list over here, my assembly tree, and turn off the visibility here. But I'll go ahead and demonstrate this right now. Since I turned the motor off, I'll go back to default, and you can see the motor is back on. And I go to section 1, it's off. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn off the visibility of this other motor. And you can also, if you have multiple sub-assemblies or parts, you can also Windows select. Remove associativity. I'll show you what happens when you get this message. The components are associatively set by other design view representations. So I'll go ahead and remove the associativity. Let me make sure I know where this is so I can find it in the browser here. Okay. So I'll select those two items, turn off the visibility, remove associativity. Now if I want to turn those back on and restore the associativity, I would right click on the weldment or assembly, and I believe this also might work with parts as well. I don't think you're going to see it with parts as often, mostly with assemblies and weldments. So I'll right click on this weldment and click on representation. And then underneath, here are your different representations, your design view, your positional, and your level of detail. So if you change your design view representation back to default and check mark associative, then you've restored it. So basically, when it asks you, do you want to remove associativity, what it's doing is it's coming in here and it's unchecking this. So if you want to restore it, you check that, and that turns the visibility back on as well. So it's kind of a one-step deal. So you right-click, representation, change it back to default, check mark associative, and click OK. So now you've restored the associativity and you've turned the visibility back on. So I'll select those two again, right-click, turn off the visibility, remove the associativity. Again, it's not. It doesn't hurt anything. That I don't know if it'd be called an inconvenience or what. What could happen is if you turn the visibility back on, like for instance, let me open this. Let's say I had a plane in here. And I had that plane turned off, the visibility. What will happen is that when I turn this plane, if I just simply turn the visibility back on, I can see that plane, even though I had it turned off before, because it removed the associativity. So it was associatively set. So in other words, what it was doing was it was pulling the default view representation, which has the plane visibility turned off. The master does not have the plane turned off. Of course, it has everything turned on. So when you remove the associativity, associatively set means whatever the assembly file has, in this case, default view representation, whatever is set here is what you're going to see in your next level assembly. So if it's associatively set, if you have your, default view representation here, that's what you're also going to have in your next level assembly. In here, because I turned the visibility off and then I turned it back on, what happened is that associativity got removed. I might be repeating myself too many times here, but I'm trying to be thorough. So, so what I'll do is I'll go to representation, change this back to default, check mark associative, and the plane is turned off. So if you have planes that are mysteriously showing up again that you didn't have on before, that could be part of it. Okay, so back to this. I'll turn that back off. That's either not constrained or something. There might be some constraints that are just not working right now because I uploaded this to my local computer so that it wouldn't be so laggy. So I'll remove the associativity again. Remove the associativity. Now here's where it can be a bit of a pain. Like let's say I want to turn off this entire collapse all this. Let's say I want to turn off this entire gear pattern, and I right click and I check mark visibility. It warns me that it's going to remove the associativity. I'm fine with that. The thing is, when you turn that back, when you go to turn this pattern back on, there's no representation in this right click menu. You actually have to go through and turn the associativity back on individually. So for instance, if I turn this visibility back on and I had some planes that were showing up, I'd have to go through this pattern, find out which of these has the plane showing up, and then I'd have to right click on that individual assembly, and I'd have to go to representation from there. Default associative, check it. I can't just do that way up here. So you can see where that can be a bit of an inconvenience, but if you're creating a view representation, there's not much you can do. So, okay, so back now I'm going to, everything from here will be a little more purpose driven. Like my intent here is to reduce this assembly so I can break this up into steps in my drawing. Okay, so I will open up this main structure subassembly and make a suggestion here. Now I see some hardware here, which is good, and that's what I would do myself. But I would also suggest I would pretty much like build it virtually in Inventor the same way you would build it, in the shop. So for instance, I would put the bolts here at this subassembly level. Another thing that helps is also kind of thinking about your bill of materials. So let's say you had this on your drawing and you had the different views and dimensions and instructions on how to put it together, and then you have the bill of material that has all the subassemblies and the hardware as well. So sometimes you have to kind of picture, or you don't have to, but sometimes it helps to picture in your mind what you want the parts list to look like. Okay, so this substructure highlighted green is one big subassembly. I want to turn the visibility off on just some of the subassemblies that make up this subassembly, and you can do that. So if you find the subassembly in the parts tree and expand it and go to the subassemblies that make up that subassembly, you can actually turn their visibility off. So even a subassembly within a subassembly can have its visibility changed. So I'll go ahead and turn off the visibility of the leg and the roller bars that are out here on the end. I can see there's a lot of stuff that I need to select, so I'll see if I can window select some of this stuff to make it a little bit quicker at first. And you can do a combination. Oh, okay, never mind. That was a pattern. So I'll turn the visibility off of that pattern, remove the associativity. Again, you can, if you know right where these items are in the parts tree, you can turn them off there as well. It deselected these. I'll select those. Okay. So I would continue in that fashion there until I have turned off the visibility of everything I want to turn off. Now, as you can see here, as I was window selecting this, it selected the entire assembly, so I wouldn't be able to do a 3D viewport selection of these channels. I'd have to actually come into the parts tree over here and remove the visibility here. Oh, again, same thing with these bolts. So it may be a little bit of labor involved, depending on, if I want to go through here and carefully select. Well, I think I just found them. But I won't get into that much detail. You kind of get the point already. So I'd have to carefully select those individual bolts and nuts here down at the bottom right. So we'll go back to representations, go back to view, default, turns everything back on, section 1. Now here's an interesting thing as well. If you rotate, zoom, change colors, no matter what you do, it will remember it. It records it, I believe. I'm not sure that you have to actually save it. Oh no, it remembered it. So for instance, let me go back to default and I'll just randomly rotate this. Then I'll go to section 1 and it remembered. It's not in that rotation anymore. It went back to the rotation I had. It remembers practically everything. Okay, so now the main point of all this is so that we can show the steps in the drawing. So we'll do that now. So you would open up your drawing, right click, open drawing. Okay, so here we are in the drawing environment. So when I create a base view, I'll change the scale. Now on the, well, actually right here on this first tab, the component tab, at the left here is the representation panel. And you can change your view, position, and level of detail representations. So I'm going to change this to section 1. And you can see down in the view it's already changed. And I'll just add my side and my top. Oops, didn't mean to do that. That was in my way a little bit. So I added my right side, top, and isometric view. And here now I have a reduced, a reduced version of the assembly. In fact, just to kind of go back, just to make this a little better, turn those off. Seems like I ran into this problem before. Okay, it turns out that this associative option doesn't update in real time. So I was checking on it and unchecking it. Even though these do update in real time, this one does not. So, well, it's updated now, but if I would have just simply clicked on OK, it would have updated. Now, I'm not sure why this view didn't update. Oh, well, because I think same reason. Yeah, it needs to be associative. So I'm not quite sure why that isn't checked by default. So kind of glad that happened. If you do go back and change your view representation, you may have to check this associative box. Now this assembly does have an extra level of complexity in that it is an iAssembly. I'm not going to go into too much detail about iAssemblies here, but if you do have drawing view problems with an iAssembly, you may need to generate the iAssembly files again. But that's just a side note. So, okay, so continuing on, I'm going to go back to the assembly. Now, let's say we want to add an additional view representation for the next step. So, whatever view you currently have selected is going to get copied when you create a new view representation. So, for instance, I have section 1 in the viewport right now. I have section 1 view representation selected right now. I'm going to go up to view, right click and click on new, and I'm going to call this one section 2. Okay, and as you can see already in the 3D viewport, it's the same as section 1. Now if I was to go to default, right click on view and click on new, I'll just name it section 3. Oop, didn't mean to do that. Okay, as you can see in the viewport, it is a copy of default. So section 1 and section 2 are the same, but section 3 is the same as default. So that's something to keep in mind when creating a new view representation. So I'll go to section 2. Now, I have stuff turned off that I want to turn back on. Well, just in making this tutorial, I discovered something interesting. If you right click on the view representation and click on edit view, highlighted blue are all of the components that are shown in that view representation, and then everything that isn't shown appears in its natural default whatever color or what have you. So basically what it's doing is it's select to include. So it's saying, okay, select other items that you want to include in this view representation. So now I can begin selecting things to add to the view. So in this case, I can go through here and select some individual parts, or I can go through the parts tree again. So I will expand this subassembly, go to the subassemblies folder, and go down to this subassembly here that is grayed out. And if I left click on it, it's now highlighted blue in the 3D viewport. So I'll add that. I'll add that and the legs, and I'll check that. And as you can see, it has added everything that I selected. I thought that was really nice. Let's see. Oop, I was in the wrong place there. So there's section 1 and there's section 2. Now as you can see, some of the planes have started to show up, and that's what happens when you remove associativity, is that the master view is now showing up here. Now of course that doesn't hurt the drawing, and it doesn't hurt your main view representation. It can just be kind of a nuisance. Now of course you could go through and add the associativity back in, I believe, but I won't go into that much detail. If needed, let me know and we can do that. So I'll go back to the drawing. Okay, so I'm back in the drawing. I've run into a problem, and once I come up with a solution I'll share it with you, but I'll just show you the problem first so that you're aware of it. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to add a drawing view. I could do this on another sheet, but I want a drawing view of section 2, and section 2 is not showing up in my view representation dropdown. Okay, so again, the fact that this is an iAssembly, it just adds another level of complexity. Without going into too much detail, so part of the iAssembly process requires you to generate files. Well, I did that. I generated the files, and it still didn't update the drawing view. So what I did was I had to close the model and the drawing. I went to the folder where the assembly is, and I deleted the folder that is created when you generate the iAssembly files, and that fixed the problem. And I have seen this happen before. So now when I create a base view and I go to my view, I see section 2. Now this should only happen with iAssemblies. If you don't have an iAssembly, you should not run into this problem. But let me know if you do create a new view representation and it doesn't show up in your drop down in the drawing environment. Let me know, and I'll look and see if I can figure out what's going on. So I'll choose section 2. I'm going to go ahead and check mark the associativity right now, and I'll create 2 more views. Again, this could be on an entirely different sheet. Just put it on this sheet for the demonstration here. And so that's how you could break down your master assembly into different steps, so that you can break them up into separate sheets instead of trying to get a whole bunch of information on one sheet. I noticed the gears were missing in that view, so I switched to the iAssembly. That's another nice thing about iAssemblies too, but again, that'll be a different tutorial. So there are two different steps from two different view representations